Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, full disclosure, I'm a fan of our next guest, Trinny Woodall, from her days co-hosting What Not to Wear on BBC. Also a fan, our YouTube producer, Elizabeth Cedron. She's much younger than me, which just goes to show the appeal of the work that Trinny Woodall has done and continues to do. She's a businesswoman, entrepreneur, supports other women in figuring out their ventures, really supportive. Great to have with us in studio the CEO and founder of the digital-first beauty brand, Trinny London, here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Welcome, welcome. How are you?
So great to be here.
Well, it's great. It's great to have you here. I want to go back. We have a nice chunk of time. I think about What Not to Wear and makeover shows. I feel like a lot of it's commonplace, but you and Susanna really were onto something in its early days. You had a column together, then you did the show. Take us back there, because you embraced women in a very warm and inclusive way, and it's not always the case.
I think it's interesting because I think there's an element that women want to feel empowered, but they also want some basic rules in which they can make their own decisions. And sometimes when we don't know which way to go, it's much more challenging to take a stance. So I think we came along at a time in the 90s when we just gave some rules. We did a show which was, titles that TV make, but it was based on a column called What Not to Wear, and it was just about the first time perhaps saying everyone is different. Everyone has different body shape. It doesn't matter your size. Everyone has different skin, hair, and eye. And so it resonated because that language perhaps hadn't been spoken before. And interestingly, we've done a book before which sold 13,000 copies. We did a TV show.
I think I have the book. I'm going to be very quite honest with you.
But that first book, nobody has. They didn't
maybe it's the second
want to
book.
do a book deal. But then after we did that show, we sold 1 million copies of the book.
That's
because there was, and it was very basic rules. It was, if you have small boobs, do this. If you have big boobs, and don't wear a polo neck if you have. It just, people come up and say, I never do that again because of you. And so that was very interesting then, all right? But the way the story was told on TV was shock TV. It was just before times of a show like The Swan, which was that extreme makeover. It was the beginning of very different TV. And when we then had done that for 10 years, and we stopped doing it in the UK because other people came up, what I loved most, it was challenging at the time, because we were suddenly not wanted. But we went to MIPCOM, which is a TV conference in Cannes, and about 12 countries bought the format, from Israel to Poland to India to Australia to Scandinavia. So I went from just understanding British women and America to then understanding it doesn't matter your religion, your age, the color of your skin. These emotional stages that we go through as women have a relevance on our confidence levels, on how we want to project ourselves. And that was fantastic research. Everything I've done probably since I was 6.5 is research for where I am now.
I want to talk a little bit about,
things are a journey, right? Think about it, right? The process. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to talk a little bit about the changing media landscape over that time, because a lot has happened in the last 25, 30 years since that show. And I'm wondering, when you look around the landscape today, whether you see something on streaming, whether you see what's going on TikTok, on Instagram Reels, where you kind of see the influence of what you were doing on the BBC.
I think the point of reference where we get our influence has changed, and I love evolution. I love the fact that there was a very small, controlled set of people who gave you your influence, and now it's all up for grabs, because I think that's an egalitarian state. And you choose. You don't have to get a subscription to Vogue magazine. You can choose who you follow and what you like. So you have far more individual. It's like you're choosing your meal from an a la carte menu. It's not a set menu.
Right.
So the benefit of that evolution has been that you can go and be influenced by somebody who's far more like you individually as a person, or somebody you aspire to be, as opposed to a brand setting the tone like a magazine or a newspaper title that we've all followed for years.
Do you feel like, well, let's get to what you're doing now, Trinny London, right? It's funny, I brought up your name in our makeup room this morning, and I have a beloved makeup artist, Pam. She's worked with Charlotte Tilbury. She's worked with, I think, Prescriptives, maybe Bobbi Brown, like a lot of brands. She's like, oh my God, she's doing, she talked about your brand. It's a crowded space, though. You launched in 2017. When you thought about it and your journey you talk about of what you've learned, How did you think about entering the space, what you wanted to do differently? Because it is so competitive.
I knew exactly what I wanted to do. The challenge was convincing investors it was the right choice. So I knew the biggest white space was a 35 plus woman. I knew that she'd been talked to with companies that were represented by a 20-year-old model. I knew she felt excluded from the conversation, but she was being sold something that might be relevant for her, but wasn't in a language for her, because every advertiser is going after a younger audience, even though the older audience maybe has the money.
Right.
So there was this sort of dichotomy, and I felt that I had already organically understood this woman, and I knew what products she wanted. I knew her frustrations. I knew when she went up to the beauty counter, the challenges she had about thinking, is the person serving me here going to be, plastering me in makeup, or going to be thinking I'm younger or older? Is she going to understand me? And so I really felt that you could develop online with personalization, which I'd loved since 99 when I started my first tech company called Ready2, before even ecom.
Yeah.
But I loved personalization and I love data. So I thought, if I can build an algorithm where I can figure this woman out and I can say, tell me this about you, and we will tell you what suits you. And I pitched that this woman, 35, 40, 45, would do that. And every investor for the first 6 months, I saw 250 people, got one investor.
You saw 250 investors? Or pitched to?
I pitched 250 investors, and I got one investment at the beginning, and then people followed, but was very much, love the idea, but those old ladies will never buy it, so do it for a Gen X and a Gen A. Gen A wasn't even around 8 years ago. Gen X, okay. And I was like, but you don't get it. This woman will come online if she feels she's got something she can trust.
Right.
And it will deliver.
Have any of those investors come knocking since?
Yes.
How did those conversations go? I mean, they passed in an earlier round. They would have gotten a better deal.
I think a nice, there's moments in your life you celebrate. And one moment was going to a tech conference where I used to go to this tech conference every year, which will remain nameless, but I would always feel an outsider. I'd feel I haven't got investment yet. When you're really in that pitch mode and you're trying to get people interested, and you bump into somebody who's said no to you, and you sort of like put on the brave face, and you're still committed and you still know it's going to work. You just got to find that right person.
Right.
And 3 years later, we just had an article in Forbes, and it was a very good article. It gave a value to business, which we hadn't given them. And then I went to this conference again, and there were like 4 people there who had to turn me down, and they were like, hey, Trinny, we must talk. and one of them, I just couldn't, and I went, oh, we're not looking for investment right now because we're EBITDA positive. But it was just that, and I think there's moments, there's that tiny moment where you think.
But Trinny, we talk about this a lot, about women entrepreneurs, even from women venture capitalists, have even a hard time getting funding.
Yes,
and it's not, and you are a known entity. And why do you think that still is?
I think it's a mix. I had to learn really how to pitch. I had to learn to speak a language I wasn't used to, because I am the type of woman who wants to go in and bring you into the world of what I see Trinny London would do.
Right.
And get you to know that woman. And it's so, I'm not going to say it's overwhelming for a classic investor, but sometimes somebody wants to say, this is A, and then from A, I'll get to B, and then once I got B, I'll get to C. And so I then realized I had to tell the journey differently. I knew what they needed to know first. And, I was asked a lot, how will you protect your downside? Not how will you optimize your upside? And I did feel, if I was a man in the room, would that have been the first question? Or would it be man to man, how are you going to optimize?
Do you think
upside?
it would not have been?
I don't know. I'm not going to judge. I think it's a type of person.
Yeah.
But I would, I did have to learn that, because I'm not I've learned to be a CEO. There's 250 people in Trinny London now, but that's been a journey. And I even got a CEO coach because I wanted to be the best CEO I could be, and understand the importance of how I delegate where I'm in the weeds, meeting people who say, do what only you can do. Otherwise you will never grow, because you'll always be doing too much in the weeds. So that journey is a challenging journey for a founder, to be a CEO in a business that's doing over 50 or 100 million, or, as you grow, you need to have that team. that is going to execute really well, and you are looking at the strategic vision of where the business is going and doing less of the everyday. So for me, the switch from that to this is a big challenge, because some days this morning I'm looking at an ad we're going to do on the tube, and I want to get in the detail, and that's like, is this my best time spent? But this is brand building, so sort of.
Yeah. Tell us about Trinny London. How big you've gotten. Talk to us about growth. We're Bloomberg. We do love numbers. Tell us what you can do.
What numbers can I tell you? I'll tell you what, when I started, it was the time of real growth. It was a time of, it didn't matter about retention. It was only about new customer numbers. And I remember we had a sort of 50-50, and they were saying you need to be 30% existing, 70% new. And I was like, I don't agree. I want retention. I want a long-term cohort. I want the customer who will buy 4 times a year and be with me in 10 years. Right. That's the customer I want. And that was challenging. So even on my second round, the valuation I was looking for, I didn't get, because they were like, you should be 70-30. And I was like, I'm happy with 50-50.
Yeah.
And then into COVID, we had a ton of people who were waiting for us to come to a store. And because they thought I'm at home for a while, they then went and bought, and then they became customers, and those are long-term cohorts. So the, reference now in the world we live in D2C is, it is about retention. It's really about retention.
But it's also about retail. Like, you haven't shunned away.
Yes.
You are direct to consumer, but you also embrace retail.
And I think retail has a part to play. Retail for a real D2C brand, like earlier D2C brands, would literally be just brand building.
Right.
But retail needs to be profitable and brand building. It can't just be brand building, because I think then you don't get to have a good EBITDA. So how do you,
It's expensive, right?
It's expensive, and we did a flagship in the UK, and we spent money on that flagship, but in 3.5 months it paid for itself. So that's great. Yeah. And it's, in the other store in London, which is a big store, we are number 1 in beauty. But here in Prince Street, I saw it I thought we have to put an inroad. We're in Saks, we have to put an inroad of our proposition of what we represent, this personalization, in a space so you can walk in the world of us, because that visual, and this is where online and offline is really interesting. If somebody's going to buy online, they need these 5 points of reference: their friend, an Instagram they follow, maybe still a magazine, maybe listening to Bloomberg Radio, but also seeing the brand physically in their country in some form in the real world is really important. So the conversion we have online since we've got Prince Street, which I fitted out in IKEA with mirror on the top, because I thought the investment here has got to be in the buzz.
Right.
It's not going to be dumping $300,000 in a 6-month pop-up. It's going to be $4,000 at IKEA with very nice mirrors on top, because our products are great. So,
Did that work? Did the IKEA part work?
It's so busy. This weekend it's so exciting, because we did a morning show this week, and also this is interesting, because you don't know how well TV works. And the next day there were people who'd watched the show coming in to the store. Right. And I thought it's interesting how media works now.
So when you talk about strategy, we've talked retail, we've talked digital. What about social media and actually using the platforms to sell? Increasingly, we're seeing TikTok, Instagram becoming sort of centers of e-commerce.
TikTok Shop has been interesting, because in different territories, it's had different premiumness. We are a premium brand. So TikTok US has a slightly different inventory of things than TikTok UK. So I think they're finding their feet. I would say the US has probably more maturity. So there's more bigger brands going on there. So maybe a Charlotte Tilbury might be on TikTok Shop now.
Right.
Instagram, they did TikTok, they did a version of their shopping before, do you remember? But they're bringing back now this sort of live stream shopping, which Facebook had worked with a few years ago. And it is something that I find fascinating.
Amazon tried this years ago too.
Amazon tried it years ago, but
it's huge. It's huge in China.
It's huge in China.
Yeah.
And the whole concept of the success of QVC, and what is the modern version of QVC? It is what social media should be.
I mean, it's wild to see the stats of the people in China and how much money they make.
I mean, that woman was 15 million in a day or something insane. But that was a 10-second in a box. That's just it's an anomaly. I don't get it. It's something that's so of that culture.
So have you cracked the TikTok and the Instagram part yet?
We do it in a way that a few people do what we do, is we don't say buy, buy, buy. We tell you a story, and lots of people tell the story. I tell the story. Our friends of Trinny London tell the story.
Right.
And they tell a story. They're not saying buy this, it's this much, this is what's in it.
Listen, so much a part of your story, I think it was so telling about how many people you had to pitch before somebody was interested in helping to fund. You now are helping others. And tell us a little bit about, we've got about a minute and a half left here, elevator pitch your series on Instagram, because you're helping others. 30 seconds, they make a pitch to you.
Yeah, so I just felt that challenge when you're younger to get, or not younger, but when you're at a much smaller stage. So they all apply, and they have to be doing over 150,000 a year in revenue, because that's somebody who then is committed to starting a business. Used to be less, but you have to, and because you're giving precious airtime, and then they have that pitch, and then we highlight their business, and they convert, and then I also was there's something in the UK of 50 women doing over £50 million revenue a year. So we were thinking, how can we get 50 women to get over £10 million a year rev? Because that's another hick. So we're looking at that now as another concept. But it is so important to lift up other women. And I think in the 90s, it was challenging for women to lift up other women. It was very different. It was a really ruthless sense in business. And I think there is a responsibility as a woman, especially when you've been on that journey of entrepreneurship and you know how challenging it is. I went to Bhutan recently, and I now mentor this Bhutanese designer, because I just thought she really needs help, and she's fantastic. And so it's exciting to take these different women and think, how can you help them to look at the challenges they have?
Just got a few seconds left here. So what's next? Or what do you, like, I don't know, what's your 3-year
growth in the US, for sure. I mean, this year it's about growth in the US.
This is an important market.
This is such an important market. This market ultimately, for me, should be double the size of the UK. So I am a UK brand coming to the US. That is in itself a big challenge. If we look at the successful UK brands that have come here, there are not that. Tilbury, phenomenal success. Right. Charles Tyrwhitt Shirt Company, really good success.
Stores all over.
Yeah. So it's looking at, how as a brand you make a US customer feel this is a brand that speaks to me. It doesn't matter the origination of where that brand started. This is a brand emotionally for me, and that's our challenge, to show American women we understand you, and this is for you, and our products are for you, and how we think about you as an individual will help you.
Well, come back and let us know how it's going as you settle in even more here. Trinny, thank you so much. Trinny Woodall, she is CEO and founder of Trinny London, joining us right here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio.